Okay, welcome to Cinderella. So, after reading Little Red Riding Hood and really reading all those versions and starting to dissect what it means, now looking at Cinderella, there's a little something extra that we get with this tale. And there's a theme starting to develop now with these two fairy tales that we're looking at. And what I want you to do in the second discussion is to consider who the heroes are and why they're unlikely heroes, because that's something that we're going to continue to see unfold in all the tales that we look at. So, first, I want to share with you something that I put right at the top. Even before we get into the questions, I just wanted to look at a couple different concepts as it relates to Cinderella. So, Cinderella, because it's so popular with girls and boys, it reminds me that there are two types of tales. And so I wanted to remember to share this with you. On your handout, number one, the child responds only unconsciously to the inherent truth of the story and cannot tell about it. So they're the types of tales like Little Red Riding Hood, I think, in my opinion, where the child responds to it. The tale is so popular because the child is able to respond to the truth of the story, but they can't really say what it is about the story that's so intriguing to them or what it is about the story that they like. What about it resonates with them, in other words? And then there's another type of tale. And so, number two, the second type of tale is the tale that the child preconsciously or consciously knows what the truth of the story consists of and can tell about it. And I think Cinderella is one of those tales. And so that's why I want to make that differentiation here between the two, because I do think that Cinderella is a tale the children can speak to, and there's certain aspects that are just so strong that even if they're not picking up on all the subtle nuances of the tale on the surface level, they can relate to the lot that Cinderella has been assigned, albeit temporarily. The other important concept to introduce here is primary narcissism. And this is important here because we're going to see narcissism as a theme in some of the other tales that we're going to look at, and some of the other characters we're going to look at throughout the course. But like Snow White, Cinderella deals with this as well. So narcissism is going to come up quite a bit in Snow White, as you can imagine. During this period, the child, and this is what primary narcissism refers to, that the child feels like he or she is the center of the universe. Okay. There's no cause to be jealous of anyone. Any jealousy that arises occurs mostly because of experiences that have happened during childhood. Now, after the primary narcissism, the Oedipal phase comes afterwards, and this is what casts doubt upon the child's sense of self-worthiness or self-worth. This is what can lead to the fear of rejection. And so this is one of the things that we're dealing with in Cinderella. The Oedipal phase, this refers to being replaced, the fear of being replaced by someone else, by a sibling, by a parent. And we see that here very clearly in Cinderella. Some of these feelings may, even for children, carry over from being potty trained around that time, being made to feel dirty or unclean or rejected by the parents, unworthy of love, these sorts of things. So this is where we're really getting into the childhood psyche a little bit more deeply into Cinderella. And we're going to continue to kind of just delve into that and the other fairy tales that we look at as well. So some have an Oedipal relation. So I want to give you a little bit more information about this Oedipal relation. So Cinderella's position, this is why it's important for you to read all the different versions in our book of Cinderella, because there is an Oedipal relation that's suggested by many different versions of this particular fairy tale. Stories from Europe, Africa, Asia. In Europe, we're talking France, Italy, Austria, Greece, Ireland, Scotland, Poland, Russia, Scandinavia, where Cinderella actually flees from her father because he wants to marry her. And intrinsically, she feels that this is wrong. In a group of widely distributed tales, she's exiled by her father because she doesn't love him as much as he requires, although she loves him well enough. So she doesn't love him enough to marry him and take the place of her mother. So, just as we discussed with Cronus and the Olympians and Zeus, when we were discussing Little Red Riding Hood, you can see that there is the idea of parent replacement here. And we see that very clearly in Cinderella. We'll also see it very clearly in Snow White. So we do see this theme in Cinderella, even without any stepmother or stepsisters being a part of the story. There's this consequence of Oedipal entanglement between father and daughter, and so this is why we're able to see that so clearly in all of these versions of the tale. There are, even though there are many different versions, there are really two main features which are essential to all of them. One, a very badly treated heroine, which is Cinderella, and then her recognition by means of a slipper. Okay, now this tale even dates back to 9th century China. I mean, this story is so old and has been told and retold in a variety of ways, excuse me. But there's something that's stressed in all of them, and that's her innocence, her goodness, and her virtue, which is perfect. So I think this story probably speaks way more to the idea of good virtue, even more than Little Red Riding Hood did. So let's start with the questions. Number one, why the tiny foot, right? Why the weird details? So a tiny foot historically has been the mark of an extraordinary beauty. It's been a mark of extraordinary distinction and virtue. And as you know, as I just told you, virtue is a central theme here in Cinderella. And this is why she's able to escape the lot that she has been assigned. The ancient Chinese correlated sexual attractiveness and beauty with small foot size. And so we see these same ideas still being recycled in these versions of the tale, because the idea is that they can identify Cinderella by the slipper because the shoe is so unusually small. She has an unusually small shoe size. And so because of her unusually small foot, that's why it doesn't fit anyone else in the kingdom when they're going around trying to find her. Number two, and I love this, talking about this more in depth, what is Cinderella named for, and where does her name come from? So Cinderella is supposed to designate this lowly kitchen maid who's dirty, who must tend to the fireplace ashes, right? This is her punishment. And it's a punishment that she doesn't deserve. It's one just because of the jealousy that's taking place in her household, because her father remarried and her stepmother has stepsisters. So Cinderella's rightful place is really to be at the head of the kingdom, is to marry a handsome prince and be queen. And her stepmother and stepsisters do everything in their power in order to prevent this. So if we look at this in different languages, we can better understand the connotations held by the name. So the French Cendrillon, like the German name Aschenputtel, those are all names for Cinderella. It stresses her living among the ashes. Now, this is important. Ashes actually refer to soot. And then cinders was saying, sorry for that interruption. The ashes are actually soot, right? So they are, black ashes that come from the fireplace, right? The furnace, the hearth. And cinders is actually a white, refined powder as a result of the burning taking place in the correct translation of the French cendré. So, please excuse the pronunciation. I did not take French in high school. I took Spanish. So what we're seeing here is different translations of the name that are actually stressing her living among the ashes, but also stressing certain things about her. So Cendrillon and Cinderella is actually the best name for her because she does become refined through this process of having to humble herself and live at the hearth. And so that brings us to question number 3. What does the hearth represent? So if you think about the hearth, especially older homes and the way that they were designed, the hearth was kind of just the center of the home. It heated the home. It was where you could cook and provide meals for your family. And so it really was the center. It's the place of, it's almost like what the kitchen is for us now in modern America. It's the center of the home. It's the place where people gather. It represents nurturing and nourishment and family and closeness and gathering, and all of that represents the mother. So for Cinderella, her mother died, and then the hearth acts as the representation, it's like the replacement of her mother. That's why she's there. But it also shows the absent mother, right? Because all the things that the hearth represents in the home are all the things that Cinderella is now missing because her mother is no longer there. So to dwell among the ashes, it symbolizes a returning to the mother and what she represents. In ancient Rome, there's some background here with the guardian of the hearth. And that was a duty of Vestal virgins. Worship actually took place here. These were younger, unmarried virgins that attained one of the most prestigious ranks available to the female at the time. So in ancient Rome, these guardians of the hearth, they were selected, and this was an honor between the ages of 6 and 10 years old. And this is about the time that we can imagine Cinderella during her servitude. I would say, prepubescent, for sure. Very early on, before menstruation. And they remained priestesses for about 5 years until they reached a marriable age. And then once they reached that age, they were absolutely pure, they were innocent, and after done serving their role, they made very prestigious marriages. There's another association from ancient Greece that has to do with Hera, which is Zeus's wife, the supreme goddess of marriage and childbirth. And so all of these things are affiliated with the hearth, with where Cinderella was assigned to stay. Being close to the hearth was the warmest, coziest place in the entire house, even though Cinderella often had ashes and cinders all over her skin and her clothes. So what do the ashes represent? Well, if we're looking at this in terms of ancient creatures, we can think of the phoenix, right? Which burns and then arises anew and is reborn out of its own ashes. That's essentially what we have here with Cinderella. The cinders are, let me start with the ashes first. The ashes are, the dirty remnants of an incomplete combustion, essentially. Whereas the cinders are the clean, powdery substance, which is the residue of complete combustion. So when we see like on Ash Wednesday, for instance. And it takes me all the way back to, my Catholic um, elementary school and high school for that matter. On Ash Wednesday, ashes are black in color, they're dark in color, and they connote mourning. You sprinkle ashes over one's head, like on Ash Sunday, or on your forehead as a sign of bereavement, right? Um, but they can also be used in older societies for the sign of cleansing oneself. And so I think both of those together really embodies what this symbol is, in addition to the phoenix becoming new and reborn. Um, so this is significant for Cinderella because she does get a second chance at the life that she deserves, and it's not because of anything bad that she's done. It's because her goodness has not yet been recognized. But if you are good, you will be recognized, and that's what we are assured of when we read this story. And that is why, number 5, the child relates to Cinderella. This is the child's hope, right? When a child is born and they're the only child, they really have no fear of not being loved by the parents. But what starts to challenge that is sibling rivalry and the future that will be ravaged by sibling rivalry. It's a real thing. And they will learn from this tale that they can prevail from that. When a child is given special attention, it kind of becomes an insult. If the child is feeling rejected by the parents, for instance, and the child may fear that he or she cannot win the parents' love and esteem. And this is what fuels sibling rivalry, right? I want to be the one that's loved. I want to be the one that's favored. If you have two things, one must be better than the other. This is kind of the thought process. And Cinderella, I think, enables both girls and boys to gain relief through fantasies of glory over this constant battle, for their parents' love and attention. And that spills over, of course, into the world as you become an adult. Whenever the youngest child or younger children are born, they're always a bit of a threat to the first child. This is why boys and girls can relate so well to Cinderella, because this is something that children can grasp on the surface level understanding of the story and the meaning behind it. In addition, why does the child relate to this? The vileness of the stepmother and the stepsisters can easily resemble the thoughts about one's own siblings, about the competition that is created between them. Cinderella can even make the child feel better about the sibling rivalry. It can remind the child of how lucky he or she is to have maybe good siblings, or how much worse it could be to have, meaner, more cruel siblings. And then even if the child does feel like the step sisters are very similar to the siblings, then that they do have, then they can relate even more closely to Cinderella and also feel, that they too are, downtrodden by the burden of that competition between siblings. Number 6, why is Cinderella chosen by the prince? Well, there are a few reasons here, actually. So it's her own virtue by which she's chosen. So recall that in my favorite version, we see Cinderella go and she's asked by her father when he's going on a trip into town. He's asking for what she would like in return, and so of course the stepsisters ask for expensive gifts, jewelry and fine clothes, and Cinderella asks for a twig from a branch that brushes his head. And, while I just love that idea here, the twig is like the memory of her mother. This is what makes Cinderella so virtuous, right? Because she doesn't just sit in her lot in life and just, she's not clobbered by it. She does the internal work necessary in order to grow from it. And even though she's not doing what she wants to do at that time, even though she's overlooked, right, and counted out by the people around her, by her own family, which sometimes children feel that way, she is able to take something and make something from it. She does it's like a rags to riches story almost, even though she's supposed to be, she's next in line to be queen, really. But it's like a rags to riches story. She makes the most of her position. So she takes this twig and she plants it, and then it grows into a tree, and that represents her mother. She plants the tree on her mother's grave, and then the tree grows. That's the spirit of her mother. She waters the tree with her tears. And if that's not one of the most poetically moving and psychologically significant features of this story, I don't know what is. And it drives me crazy that we remove that detail from Cinderella, when I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of the story. It symbolizes that the memory of the idealized mother of infancy, when kept alive, is as important a part of one's internal experience as it is in one's external experience. So even in the worst adversity, Cinderella is still able to thrive. One of the earliest recorded Chinese renderings of the Cinderella motif, there's a heroine that has a fish which grows from 2 inches to 10 feet under her devoted care. And it's because of how she was able to care for the fish that the fish was able to grant her her wish. The evil stepmother in that version of the story discovers the importance of the fish, and then she kills the fish and eats it. And then the heroine is really desolate and distraught about it until a wise man tells her where the fish's bones are buried, tells her to collect the bones and keep them in her room, and that if she prays to the bones, she will obtain whatever she wishes. So this is much like what we're seeing with the version of her taking the twig that hits her dad's head when he's riding on his horse into town, snapping that twig off for her, giving it to her, her planting it, watering it with her tears. She's talking to it. She's praying. And the outer growth of that tree represents her inner growth as a person and as a young woman, but more importantly, it represents her spiritual growth. So I just love that that version. That's my favorite version. So we still get this idea of a magic helper of some sorts, but across cultures we see it in very different forms. Why is Cinderella chosen by the prince? Well, that's one good reason why. That is one really good reason why, because she is virtuous. This reflects the emotional and psychological connection of early feeding experiences, which provides security later on in life. This is how we attain basic trust. That's at the end of this handout. So I'm going to come back to that. Trust me. We're going to come back to that and talk about what that is. But this is what you get from a mother. This is how you learn how to love. Basic trust is an attitude toward oneself and the world that you get from the experience in the first year of life. It is instilled in the child by good mothering or good parenting, right? Whoever your caretaker is, that position of mothering, right? Doesn't have to be a biological mother per se, or even a woman, but as long as you're getting some sense of nurturing in that first year of life, that gives you a sense of basic trust that, hey, the world is a pretty good place for the most part. that, hey, people do care about me when I cry or when I'm upset, when I'm hungry, when I need something, I will get it. The world is not cruel. And this basic trust is why she's able to know to do what she's doing, to plant the twig, to grow the tree, and to take care of it. It grows under her love and care, much like a child would, much like she did under the love and care of her mother. If all goes well, basic trust allows the child to have confidence in herself or himself and in the world. And whatever that magical helper image is, a fairy godmother, a tree, a fish, or the bones of a fish, whatever it is an embodiment and an external representation of this basic trust. So that's why that's such a critical aspect of this story. It cannot be killed because it is what we have internalized. So even the disappearance of the external symbol doesn't matter. Now, this is really important. This is even important for children who may have lost a parent at a very young age, even a young age where they were too young to understand it or realize it. The disappearance of the external symbol does not matter. Cinderella's mother, in the physical sense, is nothing more than a symbol of motherhood, but she still receives motherhood because she has internalized that which her mother has given her. That's something that no one, no man or woman, can take from her. And there is just this eternal sense of love here. And we get that same eternal sense of love in Harry Potter. That's what keeps him alive and protects him from Voldemort, even when he's a baby, because of the mark of love. And the mark of love is what Cinderella has internalized so that she herself does not have to be consumed by hate, because she doesn't feel hate or jealousy towards the people who oppress her. Rather, she's able to rise like a phoenix from the literal ashes that they have put her in, right? Because they're really trying to kill her. They're trying to really throw her into the fire, which she escapes. I'm getting excited. Do you feel that? I'm getting really excited about this. Cinderella is one of my favorite tales to talk about for this reason, because it speaks to a higher spiritual meaning that some of the other fairy tales don't. Cinderella, I know I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I'm sorry, I can't help myself. I'm jumping down to this 13. What is the story really about? So many things, but one of the things is that Cinderella teaches us that we are mistaken if we think we must hold on to something in the external world to succeed in life. Cinderella does not need to hold on to the physical representation of her mother. She does not need the physical body of her mother at this point. The body that fed her, the body that bred her. She no longer needs to hold on to that external symbol because she has internalized that which was most valuable about it, and it has become a part of her. And so even if the things that provide us security as children, as adults, go away, there's something within ourselves that is so much more valuable and so much more powerful than that. I think this is a lesson for the time also. I think a lot of us need to hear that. That whatever you found security in, your job, steady paycheck, health, the way of the world, all of these things, your traditions, family and friend gathering, all of these things that bring us security. These are not the things that bring us hope. These are not the things that afford us hope. They don't give us hope. They just feel good. They just feel secure. They feel comfortable. But Cinderella knows what we inherently deep down know or want to know, that this tale is psychologically correct, because for one's inner security and feeling of self-worth, no externals are necessary once you've developed basic trust. Once you know that you are loved or have been loved, truly cared for within that first year of life, there's no external that can compensate for not having attained that basic trust in infancy. There's nothing that can be taken away from you or given to you to replace that. It has to be grown in you. And if you didn't get it during that first year, you can achieve it, but only through the changes in the inner structure of your mind and personality, and never through things that just look good. And that is Cinderella's stepsisters and stepmother. They are infatuated only with what looks good and sounds good. But they, like the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, they are dead. They have already lost the battle. They have already lost before they even started. So why does the prince choose her? Yes, we are still on this question, number 6. Why did he choose her? Because Cinderella is capable of growing the tree. Because the internalized mother that she has within her, that lives within her, breathes within her, undergoes changes. Because Cinderella has done the work, the real work of virtue, of growing in virtue. Because Cinderella has done the real work of refinement. She has refined herself, and she has freed herself of her oppression, even though the external consequences of it still exist. Internally, it doesn't. She's free and clear of that. She is clean. She is cleansed of that. And that's why we call her Cinderella, named for her cinders. Because that which is good has become Cinderella's own spirit, and that which is bad, she keeps away from her own spirit. She's able to escape internalizing the things that will kill her. And that makes her a heroine. Okay, so now I've jumped ahead. So I've answered why is Cinderella chosen by the prince? Because of that. He senses her virtue. Okay, so let me break this down in another way, because she runs from him, does she not? She runs from him and tries to escape him. Why would she do that? Who runs from a prince? But she runs from him because she doesn't want him to see her in her lowly state, because there is an inherent fear that he will not love her if he can see who she truly is in this lot in life. And she's wrong, because he really does see her. Because Cinderella's not the only one who's done the real work of internal and spiritual growth here. The prince has too. The prince has too. And so it's very clear to him who she really is. And Cinderella doesn't know that, but she learns that in the end when she appears before him in her lowly state, tries on the slipper, it fits, and that's all he cares about, is that he's got the right person. Man, is he worth the wait or what? So what's up with the slipper? Okay, some fun facts. So the glass slipper is actually Perrault's invention. It used to be a fur slipper. Can you believe that? It used to be fur. But remember, Perrault's point was to encourage women to maintain their virtue and not to bestow their womanly favors on any man they were not married to. So because of this, he had to drop that feature of earlier versions. In earlier versions of the tale, which is why I want you to read all of the versions, you see that the stepsisters had mutilated their feet to make them fit into the slipper. And you can't do this if there's a fur slipper. It has to be a glass slipper and translucent so that you can see right through it and that you can see what? Blood. Right? It all comes back to blood. It all comes back to the color red for some reason. But yes, you can see the blood. And then you've got the little birds, which represent heavenly creatures, right? Birds can traverse the sky and the land between the two. And so they're known as, they're symbols, literary symbols for that which is of virtue, of higher spiritual consciousness, awareness, power, etc. And they're the birds that kind of sing the song and let him know, hey, there's blood there. And the blood is also marked by menstruation, trying to show, I think, just being unclean, being not as innocent and pure as what he's looking for in his princess. The interesting thing is he unknowingly kind of falls for this deception until the birds were able to sing a song that announced the blood oozing from the shoe. It has to be the glass slipper, it works so well. And then we like this idea of glass because it just seems so dainty and, it's like crystal. I imagine it not being glass, but crystal. It's always been the glass slipper, but I always picture it being crystal with like a rainbow of colors in it, but you can also see through it. Clear, expensive, rare, You can't really run in your glass slipper because you could break it, you could crack it, I would think. Number 8, I've discussed how Cinderella does actually have agency. As you know, in other tales and other modern versions, she doesn't. I think a lot of the introduction of these fairy tales for a lot of children now, probably since the 80s, is the Disney version, the Disney movies of the tales. But of course, we don't have some of these major details in there. So, I mean, there's some agency with Cinderella, but I think that we really have to think about how much of a role did she play in her being a hero. And I think that we do see her being more of a hero in the version, so she's not just this passive character that's rescued. She's doing the internal work. And so we have to see that with her planting the twig with the tree. We have to see that with the ancient version from China, where she's gathering the fish bones, collecting them, and putting them back together, and praying over them. I mean, we have to see her doing something that externally that would represent her internal work that she's doing in her internal journey. And to that end, let me just say this. It's really important to note at this point in the course that we often see women, young women, female protagonists taking their journeys inwardly. So we see inward journeys for the heroes and heroines, for the heroines, and then we see outward journeys for the heroes. So that's why we see the prince getting on the horse, riding through the kingdom, trying all the maidens to put on the glass slipper. That's an outward journey in search for Cinderella. But Cinderella does her own journey, but it's an inward journey. And so we see that quite a bit with male and female characters. Okay, so that really does fall in line with this. So it's not that Cinderella is not the heroine of her own story. She is. She is, because had she not done the work, there would be no prince that would be interested in her anyway. That's what makes her a heroine. And so that's what we have to talk about here is, why that is so important. She cultivates her own future, her own fate via her actions. So do Perrault's changes to the story, do his omissions threaten the message? Um, Possibly. Yes. Yes, absolutely. By taking all those really important details out, we do lose some of the greater, deeper meaning there. And that is disappointing because we don't get the real gist of what all of this is really about. Remember, this is something that's speaking to our universal subconscious psyche. I mean, we need these details that tie to these greater, bigger, much more significant lessons, life lessons and spiritual lessons. So, number 11, why does she evade the prince? I mean, she just wants to be chosen for who she really is and not for her splendid appearance, not when she's all dressed up. She wants someone to choose her no matter what. And he does. Number 12, why do the birds blind the sisters at the end of the Grimm brothers' tale? So, the brothers Grimm have the stepsisters at the very end being blinded by the same birds that were singing about there being blood oozing out of the shoe. I think this is just a symbolic statement, really, in any piece of writing, any film, any play, any novel, where we see blindness and the idea of blindness. So I think here the idea of blindness is that the stepsisters were blind spiritually in thinking that they could elevate themselves by degrading others and trusting their fate to outward appearances only. I think that's a major idea here. 13, my favorite. What is the story really, really, really about? Okay, so on the surface, sibling rivalry, wishes coming true, the humble being elevated and honored, true merit being recognized no matter what, even when it's hidden under rags. Cinderella's goodness is recognized above all else in this story, and that gives the child hope that his or hers will be also. Virtue is rewarded while evil is punished, so it speaks to that internal sense of justice that we have. What Cinderella borrows for the ball becomes her true self. It's almost a fake it till you make it kind of thing, except Cinderella really wasn't faking it. She was really just being herself the entire time. That's what she's destined for. She's the daughter of a king. That's who she really is. Even out of lowly matter, like ashes, things of great value can be gained. And I think all of those lessons really, really speak to us. But I want to share before we end here my notes on Erikson's phase-specific psychosocial crises. So this is what happens. First, you have to gain basic trust. This is how you become ready for true intimacy. This is what we learn from Cinderella. Gaining basic trust, that Cinderella obtained that from her mother. And then there must be autonomy. So Cinderella has to accept her role and make the best of it at the time, right? There's really nothing she can do. She's not in a position of power to kind of free herself from this lot in life at the time. So she does what she can with it. She makes the best of it. She accepts where she is. But she doesn't remain idle. She shows initiative, where she plants the twig and makes it grow. And then there's industry. She does work around the house, for instance. So she takes initiative in order to foster the part of her growth that she can obtain control over. And then she does it. And then she applies industry, and that for her is working in the house. And then she finds her true identity, which insists that the prince sees and accepts her in her negative identity, because any true identity has both negative and positive aspects. And that leads us really nicely into Erikson's phase-specific psychosocial crises, which we will actually pick up with next week. And we'll look at that. So these are the steps for becoming ready for true intimacy. And I would even just say, in order to obtain identity and to obtain some sense of peace and wholeness as far as who one truly is. And so those are all the things that we've learned from Cinderella. And in the discussion board, think about Little Red Riding Hood, think about Cinderella, and what makes them unlikely heroes. I'll look forward to hearing from you. See you in the discussion boards.